The following conversations took place at the 2020 Urban Farm Academy Invitational in Dallas, Texas.
Hi, I'm Michelle Madison. We're going to be talking today about nonprofits moving to a sustainable model. And I'm going to pass it around real quick.
Hi, I'm Wythe Marshall. I'm a PhD candidate in the history of science and a research associate for Cornell University, and I write about agriculture and technology.
And I'm Nathan Cash with On the Acre. We grow microgreens, edible flowers, and specialty produce for the Houston area.
Hi, I'm Amanda Van Hooser, and I do several things, wear several hats. One is I have a flower farm. Cut flowers are my thing, and then that's Bishop Hill Farm Flowers. And I also work with Profound Foods as the farm relations director, and then I also am chair of the Slow Food DFW.
My name is Jeff Bednar at Profound Foods and Profound Microfarms, and we grow a lot of different leafy greens, culinary herbs, edible flowers for chefs in the Dallas market, as well as Profound Foods is a distribution hub where we carry 34 other farmer, rancher, and producers' products to chefs in the Dallas market.
So today we were talking about nonprofits with sustainable models. And I run a company called Farming the Future, and I am a for-profit company that had originated as a nonprofit. And I do a lot of education with agriculture and teaching STEM, entrepreneurship, all those wonderful things. And part of teaching students is teaching them all these different options and what they can go out and do in the world, and sustainability. So I teach kids how they can grow up, do their dreams, and actually be able to make it profitable so they can survive and they can live. The reason why I had switched from a nonprofit to a for-profit structure was because of consistency in funding. And if I wanted to be able to keep teaching students, I couldn't rely on always getting a grant or always hoping that out of the kindness of people's hearts that they were going to help support that program. So I found ways to make it profitable, so that way I could fund my own social justice warrior dreams. And one of the things that I really think that nonprofits run into is waiting for that opportunity for funding. Writing grants or not getting a grant, having a program or having a school garden, and that money running out. And then what happens to that? And so how can nonprofits be more sustainable? How can they take steps to ensure that their mission keeps going, right? So what can we do? What can we offer as nonprofits and for-profits working together? What can we do and share in our experiences to make that a more sustainable model?
So what Nick and I did when we started the company, we had always planned on there being a portion of our company that was going to give back to the community. And so once we started making money, we started searching for those opportunities to give back. And I think that from, based off what you just said, if you create the company with a desire to give back, as long as you're always have that as part of your plan, then you will find those opportunities. Currently, we're donating microgreens to a local high school that has a culinary class that's 2 hours long. They have this amazing kitchen, and these kids are like learning how to cook 5-star meals. 8 courses. They're coming out to the farm in a couple weeks to do a field trip, and we're not getting paid for any of this, but it's allowing us to be a part of the community, to give back to these kids and to show them, what it's like to grow on a small farm and how you can take these locally grown ingredients and use it to enhance food. And, maybe a couple of these kids go on to culinary school and then they become the next Michelin chef. You never know. But, we're taking part in that formative years, showing them how important it is to take part in the community and all the stuff that you can do. Another way that we give back is we partnered with Forgotten Pet Advocates. And what they do is they collect dogs that don't have homes, and then they put them in shelters in the greater Houston area, all no-kill shelters, and then they adopt them out. And we donate antlers to them that we get from our ranch. And, it's not really a part of our business, but at the same time, we sell antlers at the farmer's market along with our microgreens. And for every one purchased, we donate one. And this year, we've taken it a step further, and they have an annual fundraiser where it's called Casino Night, Bets for Pets. And there's blackjack and, roulette and all these fun things. But the main thing is people donate stuff all year long, and then people bid on them. There's a silent auction, a live auction, a raffle, all kinds of fun stuff. But we've contacted all of our chefs and gotten between $100 and $500 gift cards from each of them. And we're putting them all into this huge basket that's going to be, auctioned off. So not only are we building our own business up by sending people to our restaurants, but we're also getting to help all these pets that don't have homes.
I think that, one of the things that when we created Profound Microfarms, we thought a lot about how do we make a difference for our community, and kind of the idea behind Profound was to make a profound impact on our environment, a profound impact on our family and on our community. And so we had toyed a lot around about doing a nonprofit and saying, hey, maybe our farm is a nonprofit. We just don't plan on maybe it pays our salary so we can continue doing it. But, how do we actually generate the revenue? And I think that's kind of part of the conversation here is looking at, nonprofit doesn't mean that you can't make money. And at the same time, one of the things that we realized after we were, we started the company and we were growing was that we could do a larger impact being a for-profit company than we could have been a nonprofit company. And, by making money, we get to choose then where our values go and what are the things that are really important to us and how do we spend money to forward those things. And at the same time, we're able to go to our customers and say, hey, these are our values. And if it makes sense to you, then you can pay the prices that we need to have for this. And, looking at how much do we want our employees to make and how do we, create real sustainability for what we're up to on our farm growing in a sustainable way and match that with something that makes an impact that's going to last a lot longer than our little business. And so, we've been trying to be as, open as we can with everybody and here are our practices and here's our values and that kind of thing. I think I don't think right now that there's enough companies that are doing that. I think there's a lot of companies that are, trying to pay as little as they can for things and maximize everything, but what they're compromising is their integrity and their values.
Well, and I think that as a company that trend is becoming more approachable, and it's what people now, especially as the younger generations are getting older, they want to work with businesses that care and that have a model of we care about our people, we care about the environment, triple bottom line businesses, right? People, profit, planet. And I also think that nonprofits are looking at incorporating for-profit practices as well, because if all of a sudden you don't get a grant and you can't continue, that's somebody's job. That's somebody's salary who all of a sudden that position no longer exists when that grant runs out. So bridging that gap between those two industries and making it where they're friends. So having a for-profit gives you that freedom. With a grant, a lot of the times you have to report on what it is that you're utilizing that grant for. And sometimes, unfortunately, that will force you to do things not in the way that you would want to do them. And you have to wait for that next phase. Are you able to implement this? When if you're a for-profit company, you have those funds and you're essentially funding your own, your own socially minded entrepreneurship adventures. If you decide that if you see an area that doesn't have any food, you can make that call and say this is now being donated or allocated to this area, without having to go through the things that a nonprofit would have to. But I think that as the outreach that nonprofits do and the work that nonprofits do help fuel what for-profits are able to do as well with innovation and technology and growing and helping people get into those industries as well. Jeff, I think your farm is a really great example of pairing all that. That's really cool, by the way, about the dogs. I approve all of that. But you have a really great setup with your facility because you can do a lot of outreach, and you with your food distribution, you pull farmers from all over and are able to help distribute all of that food into areas that they wouldn't be able to, correct?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I think that, as far as the education goes, it shouldn't be a fight between, the nonprofit world and the for-profit world, but, a happier partnership between the two, because I think both industries would benefit from that. I think nonprofits should, especially coming from, I started off as a nonprofit, waiting for the opportunity to be able to do something instead of having the freedom and the ability to do it and to be able to make that move is really critical. And I also think that a lot of nonprofits don't know that that's an option. That's not something that I didn't think that as a nonprofit, you think, oh, well, we're not for profit, so we can't do that. When in reality, it's 100% feasible. And it's something that is kind of talked about where it's like, oh, we're not about making money because that's not what we're here for. But if you're trying to make money so that way you can reinvest it into the community or further those goals, then what's really the difference between a nonprofit and a for-profit if they both have that same mission?
Well, I was going to take off on that because so there's a lot of for-profit out there that don't know how to follow that mission or follow a cause, and so they tend to latch on to a nonprofit that's already doing that so that they can, say, well, look what we're doing with them, or and so in going one way, I've worked with a lot of nonprofits, so I'm kind of coming from that side, but a nonprofit can be like the social enterprise for a for-profit, and a lot of nonprofits I know have both sides. They have a for-profit, or they start profit, and then they go and open a 501c3 so they can get grants and move forward. But when a for-profit doesn't have any kind of social justice to what they're doing, then it they lose that sustainability piece anyway. I worked with the Dallas Farmers Market, and I'll just kind of go back there because it was public, and then it went private. And when it went private, they hired me as the director to take it through that transition. And when we did that, I sat with the investors, I sat with the owners, and I was talking about how the farmers market, you're not going to make your income and your revenues off of the farmers' backs. This is more of your amenity to your development. It's also like the social enterprise piece. And they were like, yeah. But when it came down to it, bottom line, are you filling every one of those stalls? What are the stall fees? Doesn't matter if they're farms or who they are. We want money for, I was like, wait a minute, it was conflicting at that point. And that's when I left. I said, if you want to do what, your business is your business. And I felt like we weren't completing the mission that it was actually set up to be. And then one more thing, what I've seen in the nonprofit world, and there's a good book, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's that if you are a nonprofit, you have your mission, and it's to solve a social problem. But when everything goes into solving that, but if you solve it, then your nonprofit's no longer viable. So, like a food bank, if they do solve hunger, I mean, they need people to be hungry so they can continue to. I mean, so it's like working against what you're trying to solve. And so I think the best thing is to come along other for-profits so that you're being viable in different ways and can be more sustainable.
I think from a historical perspective, it's really important to note that for-profit, non-profit maybe isn't this distinction that we want to focus on, as you're saying. And I think that these examples are really on point. I think maybe we need to think about what is the purpose of this entity, this business. So we can think about something being community-oriented or justice-oriented and what those terms would mean, whether that is technically incorporated as a for-profit or non-profit, and this vary, somewhat by country. And now there are new attempts with, for example, benefit corporations, B Corps, to, provide, which isn't exactly a new category, but it's a type of for-profit business that's saying, we have in our charter a sort of mission, and here's our mission, and make that transparent. So there is definitely a new urgency. I think there's a new generation of business owners, and there are many who are, inspiring figures from before who are trying to communicate transparently. These are my values. And I think it's worth thinking about what these terms mean. So like a community-focused organization, like we think about some community agriculture that's really focused locally on providing food and stewarding land and providing spaces for recreation and education in a community. That might be a nonprofit, and because the goal isn't to make money, it's to invest in the community. But the key term there, whether or not it's a nonprofit or for-profit, is community-focused, and we should sort of evaluate them in a way in terms of if we're judging a given business on, are they serving that community? And I think that's a great example of a farmer's market. Is it helping local farmers reach customers? Is it helping people access local fresh food that's healthy at a reasonable price? What is it doing? What is its function in that society? Whether or not the business structure, the papers that incorporate it, fall into one legal category or the other, which has to do more with sort of salary structure and the idea of growth, or, hey, we're just kind of serving this community. I think you can even see this with classic examples like a church, traditionally as a nonprofit, and many provide really critical functions in the community in terms of, supporting like a food bank. But you could also look at churches where they do kind of make money. They ask parishioners for a lot of money. And again, I don't think it doesn't make all churches good or bad. I think it means that we have to evaluate that category based on slightly like, what are they saying they're doing and how well are they doing that? And is that a good mission in the first place? Do we agree with that mission? So as more of us want to see triple bottom line approaches in general, when I buy clothes, I want to know, the life cycle analysis. Where did this come from? Who was involved? Whose labor was exploited in making? Were they sort of paid fair wages? Those are questions that I think brands should try to be more transparent about, whether or not they are technically a nonprofit or for-profit. And I think that'll make it somewhat easier for consumers to say, well, they're a for-profit, but they're doing a thing I align myself with, versus, they may be a nonprofit, but I actually don't understand what they're doing. And they may be repairing institutions that are actually pretty screwed up. So again, the classic critique from a bigger picture, history would be, really development history. If you look at like classic corporate philanthropy, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation does amazing work in underdeveloped regions to combat like disease. But why are those regions underdeveloped? Why can't people in those regions get capital to grow their local economies? So, it's not Bill Gates' fault per se, but he's one example of a class of person who's benefited on the underdevelopment of those regions, and those regions existing as resource bases for companies in the quote-unquote global north and rich nations. So then, of course, it's nice to give away most of his money as a gesture within the corporate philanthropy paradigm, the classic nonprofit move. But and that is, again, it's a binary. It's a profit-making company that then has a nonprofit basically attached to it. But we can critique that whole thing and say, well, in this case, both sides have like failed in a way, even though again. Not saying that anyone intentionally did anything there, but they're an example of an older school. And I think we're seeing this move toward the triple bottom line approach is now maybe something we could sort of expect from both sides. So if you're launching a nonprofit and a for-profit together, whether you do one first or the other, I think transparency really is something that I at least hear a lot in talking to people involved in this startup food world, as this value that both customers and entrepreneurs like really, I think do believe in. I don't think it's just greenwashing. I mean, I'm sure that's also something again we can look for, but I think it is a generational shift and hopefully a really positive one that continues going.
So I really liked what you brought up about the nonprofit, where if you achieve your goal or you solve your problem, then there's no point. Then you don't need the nonprofit anymore. And you mentioned about a food bank, and it also ties into what you were saying is, okay, so you put this food bank somewhere, and now these people have access to food that they're getting in a food bank, giving away food. That doesn't solve the issue of the fact that these people don't have food, because we're bringing in food from somewhere else and giving them that food. That's not solving the problem to why isn't there access to food? Can they not afford the food? We're not solving that issue at all. All we're doing is just putting a Band-Aid on it and pretending like that's not an issue, instead of creating a profitable or a for-profit model or a nonprofit that has a for-profit aspect to it that is maybe creating a farmer's market there, maybe creating an incubator for someone for people in those areas to start a small farm and create that job, create that kind of economy, create a hyper-local economy. And another really good example is with Tom's, the shoe company. Mm-hmm. You buy a pair of shoes and one gets donated to a country in Africa. That's a huge problem. All of the people there who were creating shoes, those don't exist now. And so one of the best ways to help solve these issues in these communities is entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship can be in a for-profit or a non-profit aspect. It doesn't have to be just because it's for-profit doesn't mean it's evil, and just because it's non-profit doesn't mean that it's not profitable. However, in those countries, what has been proven, and this was recently published, I don't remember where it was published, but there was a study done that giving entrepreneurs in these countries funding to start up these companies has been the greatest solution to these poverty-stricken regions. And that's, to me, that's a really good way of showing, let's not just put a Band-Aid on the problem. Let's address the issue and let's figure out how to solve it. And that's one of the things that private industry or for-profit companies are really good at doing, because they expect results and they're on they want to see those margins. So if private industry or that incentive is driving innovation or driving, the solution for, alternative to plastics to save our oceans, instead of waiting on, the right opportunity, that's something that has a huge impact on solving that issue. So that way we don't have where Bill Gates has, all this money, and then the nonprofit aspect to it where he's solving his problems. Let's solve the actual problems. Why is it like that in the first place, right? So let's get to a point where we don't have those problems to solve. It's everybody has these equal opportunities, that we're not just spending money to mitigate it. We're actually
to look at on paper.
Right, exactly.
Can I just say one thing? I think you bring up an example there with the role of the state. So I think, yes, entrepreneurship and the idea of microloans have become really big. And I think that's an example of what you're talking about, where people have access to capital who wouldn't normally maybe have the access to try out the idea, whether it's just something really simple, like they get better seeds or they're able to buy more farm animals. And that helps the community, helps them. And so that's maybe one good example of entrepreneurship. But I think another big one is just having the state able to play an appropriate role in terms of helping people out, which is maybe different, again, from expecting that either people have to do it themselves or take the largesse of corporate philanthropy, take money from some traditional sort of foundation model. So I think there's a question about some new models that are emerging, like microloans, and I think there's just traditional roles that we might want to think about where our organizations, where do we play in that ecosystem? And just to throw something else into the mix, another term that hasn't come up that I think about a lot is what about evaluating organizations? I mentioned the word transparency, but also on circularity or resilience. So that's another one where, you might be circular in your approach to production, consumption, and then, waste management, whether you're a nonprofit or for-profit. And that might be another metric we're evaluating people on that's a little bit different from, how much money is that company going to make for investors? Or in the traditional nonprofit model, how is it serving its charter? So again, I don't know. I think there's a whole toolkit we can bring to this discussion that gets beyond, this binaristic, your nonprofit or for-profit, which isn't, I don't know. I guess it's a question how much those terms pop up in your daily work when you're growing.
I think the part of that's super interesting is why are we having this conversation? So there's all kinds of different conceptions of like what those two different words mean. And the interesting part for me is that the reason we're having this is because there's confusion and there's kind of a lack of clarity with when someone says like, oh, I'm doing a nonprofit and what that means, and then kind of like the automatic people think of the downsides or the upsides of doing that, or we're running a very for-profitable company and extracting as much value for us personally as we can. And one of the best examples that I've seen of people that are really thinking this whole process through about what are their values of like how they're helping people and how they're going to be sustainable without having to continue to rely on donations and grants and that kind of thing is a group called My Possibilities. They're out of Plano, and it's all about doing education for adults with special needs. And so they got a lot of donations. They got city assistance. They built this amazing facility. And the next part of what they're doing is they've actually set aside and started like 6 small companies. And the companies are designed to employ adults with special needs that have gone through their job training. And so the exciting part about that is what they're doing is they're actually creating a model to go show other companies how you can hire these adults with special needs and actually put them in legitimate jobs. And there's not kind of any you can show people that it's a doable thing, basically. And so they've actually created, they've got a farm aspect that they're working on. They've got a culinary school where they're putting people in kitchens, and they're doing those things that are generating revenue such that they're not going to have to continue to get grant money in the future, or they don't have to rely on it. So they're not doing big fundraiser drives and getting people to go to the gala and donate a bunch of things. They can actually go they make their own soap, and they're selling this soap hope bars that's generating a bunch of revenue and employing the people, which is their whole mission. And when I kind of heard about the way that they're doing that, it was super inspiring and exciting. Like, this is exactly what we're interested in doing, and this is how we're going to do it. And then we're going to show companies how they can do it profitably as well. So we can bring our values to all of these other people. And I think that there's a lot of lessons to be learned there for anybody who's starting a company or starting a nonprofit of how do you combine, like you're saying, that the best aspects of both of this. So you can be as sustainable, financially sustainable, and continue to do those things into the future. And then, if everyone has a problem that's big enough that where you probably can't even solve it, but you can work towards it, i.e. the food bank conversation, I think that's where there's a lot of interesting areas for everyone to grow businesses and nonprofits in the future.
So I think that's a really interesting company that's a really good way to blur the lines even more of what's a for-profit, what's a nonprofit. Is if we all had access to a whole bunch of capital, we had a plan moving forward to say, once we get this capital, we're going to be a profitable company by doing this. Because that easily, if you had a bunch of upfront capital, it's a training program. We're going to train these people, and then this is what is going to be our end product, and we're going to sell it, and we're going to make a profit by this, and that's how we're going to continue our company. We just need some startup capital. And so that it's, it just goes to show that there is this blend of, it's not just nonprofit, it's not just for profit. A lot of us, and especially, it is the best of both worlds. And how do we fit all of that together? Is it just, if we can keep having conversations like these, I know from my own experience, one of the whole black and white of nonprofit, for-profit, I run into that all the time. I mean, that is something that people have walked away from me in conferences when they have found out that I was a for-profit company. And it is, bridging that gap and making it where it's sustainable business models. And it's not just about, there's nothing wrong with making a profit, because if you're making a product, if you're actually producing something and sharing it and spreading it, and you're a contributing member to society as an entity, right? And you are achieving those goals. So that's a really interesting way. I think that people do need those boundaries. There are people who are, pretty, right, from the get-go. And so we definitely need these definitions and these lines. But I think that there's moving forward with new companies and kids growing up and learning about entrepreneurship and promoting that, new age capitalism or new age business practices or just triple bottom line businesses. and how you can have the best of both worlds and what that looks like. And what was the organization that you had said? Is that there's a B?
Oh, yeah. Well, B Corp Benefit Corp is a certification, so it's a type of for-profit business that sets out I believe there's a sort of charter that says like this is the benefit we're providing to society and how we're doing it. And I think, for example, with some of the ag companies that I've interviewed people at or some I've participated with, they're saying we're going to, and you said this as well, we're going to commit a certain percentage of our produce to people who need food in this community in such and such a way. And it might be a specific organization that you partner with, or it might be a more general like percentage of our produce that we're going to give to local food pantries. So that would be, and you don't have to be a B Corp to say like, here's sort of a list of things we're going to specifically do from the beginning that's in the genetics of the organization as we grow, even if we're a for-profit. And I think that begins to trouble this idea that for-profits only have to make money for investors. I mean, they could do other things, and they traditionally have done other things. So I think it's almost like historically very new to think that all companies do is make money for the people who already have money. I mean, that's sort of something we could get away from without losing the ability in the current system to start companies and try stuff out in the business world. But I do think there are specific approaches that historically have worked pretty well. For example, the community supported agriculture or CSA model, I think of it as in my own head associated with like nonprofit kind of modes. But I mean, it was part of a triple bottom line approach from the world of like biodynamic, like Rudolf Steiner agriculture, like people who were trying to make money as farmers, in addition to stewarding land and helping people in their community. So it wasn't actually sort of against profit making. And I think that's something that younger farmers have played around with a lot, and food hubs also have, are a great idea that could be businesses that all make money, but they're together helping serve some other needs for their community. And they could all agree on that, and if they did so from the beginning, I think that would make a profound difference as opposed to, saying we're just, we sell the stuff, you buy it or not, it's about money and, that's it.
Well, I was thinking about what you were saying about businesses today. Any business book you read, they talk about visioning and getting your mission and knowing your values. And if you have that strong core in the center, then you will be more sustainable, and everybody. That's how your decisions are made. Which kind of goes back to what nonprofits have that mission, and they're pushing that mission. And so I almost see that's needed in a business. Besides, we're going to make this product and we're going to make money, and it's a lineal, and there's a lot of waste at the end, but who cares? Because we're getting our bottom line, which is just the money. I guess the thing I was thinking about is the actions that those companies take are much more substantial in society, like Profound Foods and Profound Microfarms, because you can see the action and it's reportable, and there's plans to that and goals, and it's not we're going to do it to make the money, and then like my possibilities, you see the action that's happening. Versus like a nonprofit who is taking money in, the top administrators are getting big salaries, like $600,000 a year, and then they can talk all the how many meals they served or what they've done, but you're not seeing on the ground action and people being engaged. Their engagement is writing letters for donors and donors coming to the dinners. That's the whole, that's that layer. And so I think I'm got some time on me to see that the difference between 1970s and 80s to now, people who are younger are and everybody's much more questioning what's happening. And I think experiences, authentic, these are the things that everybody's looking for, and you see the businesses going that way, and nonprofits who are making a difference in the communities and getting more people involved, changing lives, transforming communities. That's where it is, nonprofit or profit. I mean, but I think that's if you were comparing the old school corporation versus what we see now. And I think you'll see more of these kind of businesses everything you read, listen to.
I started listening to a new book. It's very good. I'm not going to. It's called The Wisdom of Psychopaths, and it's fantastic. It's a thrilling read. With one of the things that they were talking about were, in this story, the man's a businessman, and he's just really good at selling all of these ridiculous things that he's able to put a spin on, and it's fantastic. Off topic. Sorry, everyone should listen to it. It's a great book. Anyways, the thing that I really like about being a for-profit and some of the issues that I've run into with nonprofits, and this is just my experience. So what I do is I build gardens in schools, right? So I have to go in and install gardens and aquaponic systems and greenhouses, and I use them to teach science and entrepreneurship to kids. And there are a lot of organizations out there that are nonprofits that do that. And one of the ways that I have been able to consistently further my business and get new contracts is because these nonprofits will go in and build a garden and then just leave it. And that's it. And then I get a phone call from these schools saying, hey, we have this big mess and we're not really sure what to do with it. And this nonprofit, came in and donated this garden, and now it's just sitting here and lawnmowers keep hitting it and it's just getting worse. Could you come in and help us? And, this school, I'm not getting paid to go into that school to go look at this garden that's overgrown and scary most of the time because you don't know what's in there. It's not cool. And, it'll be 4 or 5 garden beds, and they'll do 4x4, which is never, just if anybody's listening to this, never make a 4x4 garden bed. And
for 25 kids.
Yeah, for 20. And so, yeah. Yeah. And I'll go and I'll assess the situation, and I'll be like, all right, let's organize, garden cleanup day. Just start there. Give me a teacher that I can work with. I go and I meet with this one teacher. I'm like, cool, what's a good day that we can take the kids out? And go in and organize the cleanup. And then present them with a plan. Let's make sure that this keeps going. And then even after that, I think that with the incentive of being a for-profit, it does help, because if that nonprofit organization doesn't have another grant to keep going into that school and educate them, then they're not going to go back and do that. However, for me, I'm going to do it one way or the other. But it also helps my company because I'm showing this school consistency. And next year, when they're considering what programs are they going to have, well, they're going to consider my program because I just, for the last 4 months, helped them take care of this mess that was on their school property that was just degrading and causing issues and getting, if DOE shows up and they have this huge mess, then that school's going to get, in trouble. And so even that furthers okay, well, let's just keep doing this, because one way or the other, it's a good thing for you to do with schools. And at the same time, it's providing incentive for, the company to further its mission and hopefully, get a contract with that school. And if not, you're at least training the school to be able to learn how to take care of that, instead of just saying, oh, well, hands off, we did, we put a garden in there and, we did a good thing. So I think that there's incentive isn't necessarily a bad thing. But it's also, I'm somebody who I don't want to wait for permission from somebody to say, hey, here's some money, go do something good. I want to be able to go out and go do something good because that's the right thing to do.
That just made me think of another way. I'll try to say this quickly. That made me think of another way to conceptualize it, which is like you're saying that as a for-profit company, you're incentivized to do something well on a schedule, you're incentivized to sort of efficiency and quality and like a known experience, whether it's a product or in this case, like a service, like a pedagogical, horticultural service. But I think something to think about what the role of nonprofits as, it's not sort of opposed. It's not like two opposite things. It's really perpendicular. I think you might think of a community garden that's existed in an area, providing food and leisure space in that area when it was nicer, and then it goes through a period of turmoil. Companies are in and out. The city variously gives them some grants, takes away that money, but the nonprofit endures regardless. And this is what I've seen in New York, right? For 30 years, 40 years, there's people gardening in these little plots. And they're there when there's no other agriculture in the city, and now there's ag startups. And regardless of feelings, something they're doing is defining a kind of bound of possibility. So even when everyone else in the for-profit world is saying, well, you can't grow food in cities, that's silly, here's people growing food in cities. So they're not doing the most efficient growing. That's not the goal. They're not necessarily doing it the way you would if you were providing a service that you were incentivized to, as you say. In a business setting, what they're doing is expanding the way we can think about our space, our cities, our communities. And that's, I think, really valuable. It's hard to quantify with a dollar amount. And so that's one reason I do think, there's lots of nonprofits that should absolutely sort of continue to do that. I mean, you could, again, think of traditional, like religious organizations. What they're trying to do isn't arguably make money or do a thing well. It is to expand what it means to be human or provide space for you to step out of the world of business and efficiency and have that other experience. So I think it's not sort of these things are in tension necessarily in the business world. It's that one is doing the business stuff and the other is maybe there for another reason. And maybe, again, it's if, in terms of any given organization, there might be, reasons to then have two different organizations because you actually are interested in two different things that maybe complement one another.
So the value piece is interesting to me because in the nonprofit world, that's like in-kind, volunteers working or in-kind materials that you've gotten donated or activities. And so it is hard to quantify that, and especially if you're trying to make a case for your nonprofit. I worked public. I worked for a city, but I had a nonprofit on the side, which was the community garden. So I used the community gardens as city. I was in waste reduction, so composting. Hey, we can have a garden around that compost. So everything I spun it into where it could keep going. But the nonprofit had so many values to it, but nobody saw those values, even within a public entity, because you couldn't put anything to it. I didn't have a budget, but I had people, I had hours, I had awards. So those became like the values. How many pounds we weighed everything that came out, so we would have an idea. Which that data is really good right now because we've done it for 20 years. Weekly weighing the produce that's come out of there, so you got a really good chart of what can be grown in Texas. But you're always, as a nonprofit, you're always trying to find out what those are and what it can bring to the other people. So Slow Food DFW right now, we're working on a sponsorship with El Centro College. And El Centro College has a new campus, and so they're just like opening up, and they're looking for sponsors for their different spaces. So Slow Food DFW is really interested in that space, but it's like they want starting at $40,000 to have your sponsorship on that space. So I got with several of our board members, and we came up with monetary values to what we could bring to the students and to other people who come into the college. And we put that down on paper. We're taking it to the director. I called him, went through the list, and he was like, this is exactly what we want. which was actions that they could put their teeth into, but it wasn't money. There was no cash piece to that, but it was enough to say, this is going to be worth $40,000 to us. So always, I mean, even if you're a for-profit, you've got to think about what else are you doing besides the money that's coming in when you're trying to, and we track everything, Profound Foods, because we have the grant, but also you have to document this so that you do have all that information of what value it brings.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think, I like to think really super long term. And one of the things that I've thought about a lot is that businesses of the future are going to incorporate the best models of what we've done in the past on both sides. And that bringing in a lot of those, like the values and the transparency of the nonprofits into a for-profit world and creating, financial stability, I think is the future business model. And that's where we're seeing like the Patagonias and the, some of these other companies that are like, hey, this is our mission and I'm going to pay $60 for that jacket to do that. And we're going to, watch where all of these things go. I think that's super important. So when we came up with Profound Foods, it's a food hub, which is typically a nonprofit. I think most of the food hubs in the nation are nonprofits. And we said, hey, we're going to do a little bit different. And, at the end of the day, our values are very, very similar to what a nonprofit would be. It's like our goal is to help farmers. So, if we're looking at a for-profit company and the conversation that we were having about like how do you extract the most amount of value, that's not all what we do. We have a fixed margin and the farmers set their price. So there's not a whole lot of companies that say, hey, vendors, you can charge whatever you want to charge and we'll just have a little markup and then we'll go sell as hard as we can over here. And then we looked at like what are all the other things that farmers really need and how do we work towards getting the farmers those things. And at the same time, it's like how do we get the chefs those things? And how do we have the smallest margin possible so that all sides can really make it work? Farmers can maximize this, get the farmers as much money as possible, and at the same time keep the prices realistic for restaurants to be able to make margins so they can have their companies go on and succeed. Because we don't want anyone to fail, and our goal is not to just to make money and give ourselves jobs. Our goal is to make like an impact in our community, in our food shed, and have more environmental sustainability by supporting the farms and have better food and culinary scene and like have us all make more money so we can have nicer things and help our neighbors and all of those kind of things. And I think that that for us is I think a lot of the attributes as to why we've been successful and have had rapid growth. And I that's where I want to see a lot more of those things in the future. And that's the reason we're here having this conversation, right?
Well, I think that was actually a fantastic note to wrap up this conversation on. I think that all of us sitting in this room are excellent examples of everything that we just talked about, of bridging that gap and trying to make the world a better place and create more sustainable business models, whether it be for-profit or nonprofit. I would very much like to have another conversation with you guys about this at some point, but I do think that we should wrap it up for now. But I want to thank all of you guys for being here, and I look forward to the next time.
Thank you.